everyone, and welcome back to the Political Power Hour. My name is Devin Plummer, and today I want to be talking about the beginning ideals and philosophies concerning the United States. And today I am here with.
Andrew Warren.
Yeah, very good to meet you. Would you like to kind of go into what you do for the university?
That's a good question because I'm not sure I got the answer, but I'm an adjunct in the philosophy department.
Oh,
And what I do there is I started out by teaching philosophy of law. And because I like the job so much and I like you guys, the students, I have expanded into also teaching ethics and political philosophy.
cool. That like the philosophy of law. I think that would have been a class I would have been very much into. That sounds pretty interesting. Did it dive into like the reasons behind the laws that we have today? Cool.
Yes, and how to do it properly.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I guess that sort of ties into what we're gonna sort of talk about today. Just like the beginning of the United States. I've done a couple shows of this talking about present political issues, but I think it's always important to go back to the beginning and see just why the heck we American, or I guess Europeans, decided to create a new separate government, and look at the ideas behind that, and to dissect if they they hold up in the modern day society. But excuse me, the first thing I kind of wanted to dive into was just the ideas like behind the United States. I know you can talk about like Aristotle, Plato, a little bit more modern to that time, like John Locke, Machiavelli. But just what do you think was maybe the most crucial? I mean, there's a bunch of ideas that they gathered, but what do you maybe, in your opinion, was the most crucial idea or philosopher that they sort of, I get lack of a better word, just kind of took from?
That is a good question. The most crucial philosopher. I've got my chin on my hand and I'm thinking, Devin. The most crucial philosopher is probably John Locke, because he engendered the notion that government is only legitimate with the consent of the governed. And I'm
and life, liberty, property too is.
Oh, that's crucial, but I'm thinking more about our system of ratifying the government, which in some respects goes back to the ancients, to the classical civilizations. But the answer to your question is, I'm sorry, I have a tendency to think aloud. I would say John Locke is the most crucial.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely would have to agree. Just
that's a hard question.
Yeah, because you can make the argument, right, that there's no one answer. There's a bunch of people.
Yeah, I mean, you got an argument that James Madison.
Sure. Yeah, I should know, the father of the Constitution.
Yes. Purportedly. I did not answer Madison, even though, in my opinion, he's the sine qua non, because I didn't think that's what you were kind of looking for. I thought you were looking maybe a little back, prior to the Constitutional Convention. But the thing about Locke that I think that made me think to answer him the question was not life, liberty, and property, even though that is critical. What I was thinking about was our process of ratifying the Constitution, sending it to the states who were responsible for organizing, ratifying conventions, and getting the consent of the people to the Constitution in that way. Now, people was a somewhat limited concept at that time, but that was the idea. This Constitution's got to be approved by we, the people. Again, a limited definition of people, but progress in that direction for Western civilization.
Sure. I mean, I don't think people think about often enough that how just radically different that idea was because, well, I mean, since the beginning of history, really. I mean, you have, little hints here and there, like the Magna Carta that was, sort of, nudging towards that idea, but not really.
Yeah, that was between King John and the barons.
Mm-hmm.
That really was an even more restrictive definition of "we the people" than we use. I mean, I think you could contend. You could go back to the Greek city-states and their democracies and the Roman Republic. If you're looking for some examples or hints of "we the people,"
Mm-hmm.
but to me, Locke and the constitutional ratifying process. If you asked me tomorrow, you'd probably get a different answer.
Yeah, no, I in the moment definitely have to agree because, up until that time, there was no government ran by the people for the people. It was just, excuse me, just emperors, monarchies, what have you. There was no, even hints of democracy.
Oh, there were hints.
Oh,
the
yeah.
House of Commons in England.
Oh, right. And yeah.
The House of Commons in England was a democratic body. If you had asked me this question 45 years ago when I just graduated from KU, where my political science option was foreign governments and comparative politics, I probably could have identified some of the more democratic governments in continental Europe. I just don't remember them
It's all
anymore.
Good. I suppose that's true that, and like just, talking about, the different ideas. And I think that's also something that people sort of, I guess, general people sort of fail to realize too, is when you talk about those ideas, there sort of has to be some credit given to the founding fathers of the time. Because, these weren't some just, backwater farmers that just, were like, born yesterday. And it's like, let's make a government. These guys were very well read and had studied just about everything to that time.
There actually were a few backwater farmers, but they were well-read backwater farmers. And if you're looking for hints of democracy, the lower houses of our colonial governments, our colonial legislatures, is a good place because, for example, I've forgotten the exact name of the Virginia legislature that was formed very promptly, an attempted legislature. They were working on democracy for limited groups of people. And as in Virginia, for example, those shifted.
And you could move the mic closer if you want to lean back. That's fine.
The government of Virginia kind of shifted its definition of the electorate over times because they went through about 3 iterations. By the way, if you ever go to Virginia, the Virginia House Capitol is a must-see.
Cool.
It is very cool. So the world, the Western civilization, and in particular the English-speaking people, were moving in a democratic direction. We accelerated the trend.
Yeah, because, where that comes from, right, is the when you gave, I guess, sort of, was it the so the English settlers go over to sort of form the colonies, and then there's sort of, it's a literal ocean away. So there's some separation between the colonies and the mother country. And, of course, I think the 7 Years' War occurs, during that time. So there's separation, right? And so I've heard people say that the colonies sort of get a taste of like independency and like a little bit of freedom. And then the when the English come, wanting taxes after the 7 Years' War, and there's, no representation and, stuff we've heard a bunch. It's sort of that, that taste of freedom that leads them to kind of like want to be fully independent, I suppose.
Have you ever seen the movie Last of the Mohicans?
Oh, with Daniel Day-Lewis?
Yes.
Yes.
That depicts some of the friction between the colonists and the British that frictions that were aggravated by the French and Indian War.
Mm-hmm.
And it's worth noting, I'm trying to think of the guy that wrote the book. That's embarrassing.
That's why I have my phone to look up stuff.
The book, Last of the Mohicans, illustrates that even better, the friction between the colonists.
James Fenimore Cooper.
That was embarrassing for me not to remember that. When you're 67, you'll understand. Yeah, the British needed some tax revenue to pay for the defense of the colonies, and the colonies.
And if you're trying to put yourself, in a sort of 1600s mindset or 1700s mindset, if you're a monarchy and your colonies, you've helped your colonies sort of fight this war over there, you're like, hey, can you pay us back, please?
A principal objection was how those taxes were to be apportioned.
Yeah.
And collected. It's my understanding of that period that the colonists did not object to paying a fair taxation. Mm-hmm. What they objected to was who was going to make the decisions about its collection, apportionment, and expenditure. Mm-hmm. I have always had the sense that the revolution was as much about identity as it was about politics. The colonists were just evolving into a different people from the British.
Sure.
Similar, cousins, friends, brothers even. But it was time for self-government. And anyway, that's a debate we could have all day.
Yeah.
And I took American history 25 years ago here as a graduate student from Alan Bush, the late Alan Bush. And I'll use the excuse of my age again for my memory. When you're 67, you'll understand.
No, that's perfectly fine. But no, it's always fascinating, I think, to look back on just the founding fathers, because I can't imagine, like, some of these guys were like super young too. Like,
I think Madison was 36.
Yeah. I can't remember who was one of them, like 19 or 20. I can't remember who that was.
I don't remember who it was either, but there were a couple of really young people there.
Hamilton.
How old was he?
He was 19. Which is like I just find that crazy, because like I'm 23, and like I can't imagine sitting down to like a couple of years ago and help create a document. But that's what I also find fascinating too from the beginning. Even with the founding fathers, with all of their like sort of grand ideas. You always think back in history, and with critical moments in history, I often wonder, like, if certain people weren't alive or like weren't there, would have this event gone to if Napoleon wasn't here, if, for example, like if Hitler wasn't here, if Patton wasn't around, would things have gone as the same, or would they have turned out worse? And it's those people that probably needed to be there.
The question of destiny versus human agency is one that goes clear back. The earliest contemplation about it I can remember studying is Antigone by Sophocles, which was written in D.C.
Whoa.
And the question is, can we really make any difference, or is our fate cast? The book of Job.
Yeah.
Who's making the decisions here, Job?
Free will versus sort of like predestination.
Well, free will, I think we indisputably have the ability to act as
Sure.
well, maybe it's disputable, but the question is, how's it going to come out?
Yeah.
And I think that's a question that plagued the ancients. Today we believe that we can make a difference. And I feel like we have to believe that. But the ancients thought your fate was cast, and that the fate of empires and city-states were cast.
Yeah, so just kind of I mean, there's probably a multitude, right, of different ideas that sort of spring up from like the revolution or were sort of taken upon. And just another just radically different thing that sort of happened is this the documents themselves that were, I mean, you know, the first one, not a governing document, but, you know, the Declaration of Independence is just, it's still, to me, I mean, maybe I'm biased, you know, being American, but it's still one of the most beautifully written documents I've ever seen.
It is. When you said maybe I'm biased because I'm an American, your listener can't see, but I pointed at myself. There is some manifesto language in the Declaration, but the aspirations that it enunciated, in my view, brought Western civilization, contributed to bringing Western civilization a step closer to just government.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that you that we sort of brought up Locke earlier, because there's a few tweaks to sort of, you know, life, liberty, and property changes to life, liberty, and was it pursuit of happiness?
Yes.
So that's it's all these ideas that that, you know, were not explicitly stated to be like rights of ours, but it's the, you know, the idea of, you know, inherent values that we all have, which is, you know, something else that is just fascinating to look at. And like you said earlier, it's a government for the people. It's not the government, you know, making up rights and saying, oh yeah, you guys have these, I'll give them to you. It's like, no, these rights have already, these rights are already ours. It's not the government's place to tell us that we have them.
That's right. And I am pleased to hear a modern college student
yeah.
recognize the concepts that run through our government in a liberal arts way, which you seem to have.
Yeah, no, I always kind of joke, like, kind of maybe to keep myself humble, because it's like I never want to come off as like I suppose like arrogant or cocky, or just, I always kind of like, no, trust me, you're not that smart. But I try to get my hands on everything I can sort of read, and of course that probably goes into my own biases of, like, you know, what my own thoughts are. But yeah, no, I think it's just something that's well, I mean, for example, the other day in class, we had an informative speech, and I just did it over the Bill of Rights, because, you know, I wanted to do all 27, but it was a 4-minute speech, so I'm only going to do the first 10. And yeah, right off the bat, I asked, it's like who here is informed of your constitutional rights? And it's, maybe it's a nervous class, but no hands go up, and it's like it's just it's things that, at least in my opinion, we take so much for granted. Just the idea of just the first couple amendments, all the way down to the 10th. It's other countries for sure, no doubt, have ideas like the freedom of speech, but not all of them. And it's unfortunate you see cases of just people just being straight up jailed for speaking out against their government.
Yeah, there was an article in the Washington Post this morning about, I'm not going to try to pronounce his name. There's a guy in Russia who's in prison right now who's been baiting Putin for years. And baiting is the wrong word. I want to say something about what you just said. We are going to lose our democracy unless more Americans are well educated in our government and what we need to make it work. I am troubled, not certainly by what you've said today, but I am troubled by our students who simply do not understand the mechanics of the American government, much less understand the principles of Western civilization that are required for us to function as a democratic republic. When I was an undergraduate, and I just hold your hand up in a stop sign if I'm getting off the subject.
It's all good.
We were required in college, in order to graduate, to take American government and a class called Western Civilization. And Western Civilization was, what are the ideas, the threads of ideas that run through from Mesopotamia to today. We no longer require those. We're moving our universities to what one of the regents recently called economic engines. That's not the purpose of the university. It's an important purpose of the university is to prepare students to be the leading, forgive me, political class in our civilization, in our republic, and we're losing the education. I really am enjoying working with you today because you're ready to do that.
Well, at least attempt to try, right?
You're doing a good job,
and that's I believe that's all we can do. Is at least attempt to try. But I agree. When I see, that's kind of where I kind of got my first sort of steps into politics. Is every generation, of course, has issues, but when I look at, it's easier for me to look at mine and to see, man, we got some problems, and that's probably the first solid step is probably education, and to understand that sort of the Western liberal values that that I almost said unite us, but it's hard to find anything that unites us within the United States, really.
One of the things you mentioned when we talked in my office about what are we going to talk about, you asked about the Electoral College.
Yeah, right.
And
was it Jefferson? One of the founding fathers really believed in that idea, right, to focus on or I don't know if it was Jefferson, but one of the founding fathers I know just wanted strictly just education, the educated people to run for the government.
Well, are you thinking of John Adams?
Maybe.
Adams believed in a aristocracy.
Yeah.
Jefferson did too, but they disagreed about the source and the qualifications of the aristocracy.
Gotcha.
When I use the word political class, we've got to have an educated, for a democratic republic to work, we've got to have people educated in how it works and we are losing our values.
Mm-hmm.
You've mentioned the Bill of Rights, which I happen to think is a pretty good statement of the values of the United States. George Will once called it our national secular religion, the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Did you read about what's going on the campus at Harvard?
I did, unfortunately.
I'm a little disturbed by that. Because today apparently somebody rented a truck and on the internet was able to get photos of the signatories to the petition that is blaming Israel for the entire conflict.
Yeah, no, that thing is...
Well, that's an attempt to intimidate people out of exercising their freedom of thought and freedom of opinion. Whether or not I agree or disagree with the signatories to the petition, I think driving around with their pictures on billboards is a kind of a dead or alive sign. Wanted, dead or alive, and I'm not in favor of that. Let's debate the idea.
Sure.
In many ways, my favorite Federalist paper is number 1.
Oh, yeah.
Because Hamilton says, I'm in favor of this. I'm biased. I'm Alexander Hamilton, and some of you at least are going to dislike me because of who I am. Address my ideas and try to disregard that it's Alexander Hamilton.
Absolutely.
A colonial, a revolutionary era rebuttal of the ad hominem argument. But
too often, but it's popular. What is, and it gets views to attack a person and not the idea. And I don't know if that's, maybe you can blame that on most of it on modern media, just the direction that's taken. But maybe there's some responsibility still with the people who decide to do it and not to engage in a debate or just to sit down on a panel or something and just air out what you guys are thinking.
Are you old enough to have listened to Rush Limbaugh?
I've heard the name quite a bit, but I haven't.
I feel like he was a radio commentator who I feel like did great damage to our political culture.
Gotcha.
It became
just more of attacking and
and he was right about some things.
Sure.
I'm not saying that. But it was attack, it was ridicule, it was straw man. He was the master of the straw man argument. And I feel like he and Rupert Murdoch have done a great deal to damage the American polity.
Yeah. I would have to definitely give it a listen. It sort of like similar to the, like, unfortunately, like because if I'm not wrong, he was Republican.
Sorry?
Rush Limbaugh, if I'm not wrong, was Republican.
I was a Republican 50 years ago. Rush Limbaugh aligned himself with that party. No question about it.
I wonder how similar it sounded to our recent Republican debates.
I don't watch them.
Yeah, I just watched highlight clips, and it's high school. Like it's so far. It was just high school insults basically, and it was.
That's depressing, isn't it?
Yeah. Because
I'm old enough to remember the Nixon-Kennedy debates.
I watched those. I had the privilege of watching those in Jay's class, and it's policy. And at least the first debate, the first Republican debate is, me personally, I think Nikki Haley won because she was honest about some things as far as like abortion, being honest that it's to her voters that it's something that'll never be outlawed. There'll be a place for it. And she seemed, as far as like foreign policy, to unite the country. And this the rest of them, it's just noise.
It's sad.
Because in 2016, I was like, I wasn't old enough to vote in 2016. But, with Hillary, Trump, Biden, Trump, it's like, this is the best. This is what we got.
That observation, you may not remember the professional wrestler that was the governor of Minnesota, Jesse Ventura.
Jesse Ventura, yeah.
He catapulted himself to public in a three-way debate for governor in Minnesota when the two leading candidates started to really bicker. And Ventura
independent, libertarian, or what?
He was an independent of some kind. I think he was a libertarian.
And he got super popular, if I remember right. At least his first run, and then it kind of went off the deep end.
Yeah, but he asked the voters. He said, "Do you think this is the best we can do?" Because they were the two leading candidates were bickering, and he said, "Is this the best we can get? Is this what we deserve?" And the public kind of. But I don't see much public sympathy for that kind of attitude today. It seems that throwing brickbats and insults is what the public wants. And my dad used to say, we get the government we deserve. And we're acting as a nation poorly when it comes to politics.
I don't know if it's – and I think Trump's probably a symptom of that. I don't think Trump's to blame. I think that's just sort of the atmosphere that was sort of created, and he just capitalized on it because he's what I mean, as you know, someone who leans a little bit to the right. I mean, when he did good, I cheered. When he did bad, I booed as loudly as the other side because it's just how charismatic he was and is. It just. And how he could sort of relate to quote unquote common man, you know, whatever people think that is. And it's this sort of a symptom of the behavior that we've sort of allowed, and in the people that we should hold to the highest standard. And it doesn't seem like it very much anymore that at least from what I hear, it's love him or hate him. I think everybody can agree on that. Yeah, this is the wrong people in government, and reasons to why that is. I don't know. Funding, who's backing them, that they're already have been in the governmental sphere for a long time, so they have some pull already. You know, there's probably a multitude of theories that why are these? It's sort of the same individuals that kind of revolve around it, and it's unfortunate that I don't know how you go to getting the best and brightest ideas, but if there's not a significant amount of funding behind that, how do they get to a grand stage to, voice those ideas?
Are you aware that Mitt Romney gave a lengthy interview to Atlantic Magazine about 2 weeks ago?
Oh, no, I haven't.
It's very interesting, and it's something that's troubled me for years. Our politicians are preoccupied naturally by being elected and reelected.
Mm-hmm.
And they pander to the lowest common denominator in order to win primary elections.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how we break that.
Mm-hmm.
Plato, the Platonic Socrates, said that what politicians are best at in a democracy is not identifying or solving problems, but they're good at getting elected. And that his contention
making
was
promises.
That's a different skill set. If the republic is in decline, and I believe it is, it's the fault of the voters. We can blame politicians all we want, but we're the ones that are electing them. And if we want better elected representatives, we're going to have to be better voters.
Sure. And I guess that could get into another conversation on itself, right? Is, should the people be allowed to elect ever they want? If you're going to go full, if you want, if you're super pro democracy. You know, whether you think people are dumb or not, you know, it's their right to elect who they want, and it's
Was it the 17th Amendment that made the Senate popular election rather than by the legislators?
It's a good question.
I'm going to ask, I guess this isn't going out over the air. Your Dr. Gould will be the only one that hears it. Have you read Plato's Republic?
Yes.
I only read
years
parts
ago.
of it in college, but I read the whole thing about a year ago. I sat down and read it. That's well worth reading his views on democracy. Now, I don't share them.
Yeah.
But he has some very poignant observations and criticisms of democracy. I understand that Senator Sass from Nebraska, who I think has resigned to become the president, I think that's process is he's now in office in Florida as the president of one of the universities down there. I think his book, and I'd like to read it. He's a PhD in history. I would like to read it because I think he made some observations about how to improve the quality of our representatives. But I believe that our legislature and our Board of Regents are marching at double time away from educating our college students to be the best voters we can get. They're disregarding at best and planning to deviate from an educated electorate. They don't want us to be liberally educated, and by liberally I mean intellectually, not politically, anymore. Like I said, I had to take Western Civ. We had a choice between a 6-hour and an 8-hour option. I took the 8-hour option. It was a great ideas sort of course. I'm a huge believer in the great books.
What do some of those include?
The great books, oh, well, you could probably name them as well as I could, is a program that's currently taught at the University of Chicago.
Oh.
You spend 36 hours of college credit reading the great books, the great ideas of Western civilization.
Oh, neat.
And I'm going to bring you a copy of the book by one of the two guys who kind of invented the program.
That sounds awesome.
I'll leave it at the political science office for you in a couple of days.
No, I love that idea.
It's called Education for Freedom.
Cool.
And it's written by a World War I veteran.
Oh, wow.
It's actually a series of speeches. He was the president of the University of Chicago. I just left a copy in the political science office for one of your classmates.
Cool.
Alex Johnson.
Nice. Yeah, no, he's a good friend. But
you'll get one too.
Cool. No, I love that idea of, well, even I think, of course, especially the Western liberal philosophy should be scrutinized, as well as other ideas, just to see, do they hold up? Is this worthwhile? And I think that leads into the next point I want to talk about perfectly is dead set on representative democracy.
I am.
Good thing, bad thing?
Good thing.
Why?
Here's why. As humans, we have I share Locke's and Jefferson's notion that we are all born with inherent human rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. 1, people should participate in selecting their governing officials because I believe in consent of the governed. And I'm not talking about Potemkin elections like Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping have. Those are bogus, and we all know it. 2, who best to decide and to have input into our problems, especially on the local level, than the voters? Now, I worry about direct democracy. I am not a fan of direct democracy.
Majority rule.
But I am equally worried about the listening tour. I like the listening tour, but I think these hocus pocus polls that political candidates send out in direct mailings, if
I got a text the other day from Ron DeSantis, quote unquote.
yeah, asking you how you felt about issues.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I don't think Ron DeSantis will ever see what those say.
Yeah.
I could be wrong about that, but he'll never see the results of that. What worries me about that is if we're going to run government that way, why do we spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year on a Library of Congress, the Congressional Research Service? I had a friend who was a senator from South Dakota years ago named James Aberesk. He just died in the last year. And the night Jim was elected to the United States Senate, in his acceptance of speech, or whatever you call it, he said, I'm not going to run for re-election because re-election takes time and money. And I'm not going to spend 1 minute of your time going out, and he looked at the voters and he said, your time going out and raising money and campaigning. He said, I want to study the issues and be the best informed senator for you that I can be.
Wow.
He didn't say, I'm going to do what you tell me to do. He said, I'm going to do the best I can to master these issues and make an intelligent vote.
Well, I think there's some incredible power and honesty within that statement, because like at the power side of it, if you're not worried about re-election, then hey, I'm just going to get stuff done and I'm not worried about what comes after. And I think that's incredibly honest too, because as we all know, there's promises that are made on every election, and there's an argument to be made on either side. It's like, well, do they lie? Maybe. Or, also, is it incredibly difficult to keep your promises once you're actually in, for example, like, an easy one to pick on is the president, where they make a promise and it doesn't get done. Well, it's like, realistically, it probably extremely difficult to make good on some of the promises. But I think, that's an incredibly honest statement to say, I will try. I'm not going to promise that it will get done, but I'm going to be the best that I can be. And I think that's, just honesty that is very, very hardly like apparent today.
I don't think politicians lie as much as the public. They're all liars and cheats. I don't believe that.
Yeah.
But they're selling us what we want to hear. We don't have much in the way of leadership.
Sure.
And I do think Trump was a leader for his base.
Sure.
I think he still is.
Sure. I'm 60-some%. I think he's polling 60-some%, which is kind of crazy still.
I'm going to try to avoid partisan politics. I have real strong feelings about Mr. Trump.
Sure.
And I don't want to disclose them.
No, it's all good.
Although I assume Dr. Gould's the only guy that's going to really hear this probably.
Probably.
He knows how I feel about Donald Trump. But in the interest of pretending to be a radio guest, I will try to appear objective. These charades of closing down the government over budgetary matters, let's have an intelligent debate.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not having an intelligent debate. We're having a bunch of grandstanding and showboating. And,
sure.
And one of these days we're going to wake up and find out that the nation's credit really has been devalued. Now, one credit rating agency downgraded us the last time we went through this, and I don't know whether we've ever been raised back to the highest level of government indebtedness in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But one of these days we're going to wake up, and then the interest rate's going to go way up on all of our national debt. And that's going to be a disaster. It's going to be a disaster anyway. But We need. Well, I don't think that they're standing on the soapbox and saying I'm going to mislead the American public, but we need more forthrightness about what our problems are.
Sure. Yeah. No. It's definitely true that they kind of beat around the bush as long as they can, so they don't accidentally trip up and say something that could lose all of their support.
I want to reiterate a point that I keep making. This is our fault. Blaming the politicians is shifting the blame to somebody else. We get what we deserve. It doesn't cost anything to drive down to the polling place and pull the lever for an intelligent, well-spoken, well-educated, well-read candidate. That doesn't cost anything. And yet we continue to elect boobs. And it's got to stop. We'll have nobody but ourselves to blame if this thing collapses.
I could find myself very much like agreeing with that. I think that's really sort of unique. I really haven't heard that perspective. Take the responsibility.
Yeah,
that's unique. I haven't heard it much because it's easy just to blame the politicians.
That's right.
But yeah, there might be very much some truth to that.
The other day in critical thinking, I'm auditing a critical thinking class. Nice. Looking forward to teaching it, which I think I'll decline to do. But two of the students said, I don't need this class because I don't vote. And I thought, well, good. If you don't think you need this class, then I'd rather you didn't vote. And I strongly believe that we get what we deserve, the American people. Now, we've got some non-democratic institutions, the Electoral College, which, by the way, I am a lukewarm supporter of the Electoral College.
I sort of lean that way as well. You go on Twitter for 5 minutes and you're like, yeah, there should be an Electoral College. Because
that's a good point. If you want to know how many idiots live in the United States, just go on Facebook. Yeah. My generation does Facebook, but I really believe that Madison was correct that we have to protect minority rights. And a popular vote will, in fact, probably skew our presidential elections dramatically towards the coasts. Now, in the two elections in my lifetime where the Electoral College overturned the popular votes, I was on the losing side. I voted for Gore and I voted for Hillary. But I do not begrudge the Electoral College up to a point, because we can't just permanently disenfranchise the red states in the country. That'll tear us apart as fast as anything that I'm talking about right now.
Sure.
Do I like it when that happens? Not particularly, but I think the Electoral College serves a useful function. And by the way, another function that it serves that's not being observed, it was not created for this, but imagine if we had to recount every vote cast in the United States.
Yeah.
But the Electoral College breaks it down into 50 separate elections. So if Georgia has a confused election down there, we don't have to recount every vote in the United States. That wasn't what it was for, but that's how it's working out.
Is that what happened? Quick tangent, but is that what happened in Florida with Bush v. Gore? Did they have to recount Florida?
Yeah. And the Supreme Court stopped it.
Which I appreciate Gore, what he said.
Oh, yes.
Whatever the Supreme Court says, that's what I'm going to go with.
That's right. That's right. And
you got to have some faith in the system a little bit. If it's because you know what, you saw it. I mean, with 2020, you know, just the amount of this, probably the best way I can phrase it is intellectually dishonest people thinking that it was a steal. And it's like, if there's no faith in the system, then I don't know how it can function as well.
If I thought the system was corrupt, I'd be in favor of us taking civil disobedience.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the January 6th demonstration at the Capitol was not civil.
No.
It was violent.
Mm-hmm.
I'm opposed to that. I have worked elections. My parents, from the day my dad retired, worked the elections every cycle. And when people say that in their heart they know that the election was stolen from Trump, what they're talking about is people like my parents, because an awful lot of those volunteer election workers are retired folks.
Mm.
They're not liars and cheats.
They don't have any interest in.
Well, they might, but
Yeah.
they're real. They recognize
Yeah.
that the greater interest is the fair functioning of
Exactly.
democracy, and I will have a great deal of trouble. If we were not on the air, I'd tell you I will never forgive the Republican Party for corrupting confidence in our electoral system, which I believe works quite well.
What I'd go out on a limb and say it's probably one of the safest in like the world, our election system.
I don't know about the rest of the world, but I know that I have confidence in ours.
Yeah. And you brought up a good point too with civil disobedience. One of my heroes of history, Martin Luther King Jr., is if you do it with hatred and with violence, that's a good way to just get people killed and get nowhere. But if you continue to preach your idea, there's a value in staying as calm as you can, saying your ideas, and eventually people are going to listen because you're just around. And
well, Martin Luther King was so good that people did listen.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I would share the notion that if you repeat your position long enough, people are going to listen. It seems to me that increasingly the person who yells the loudest is the one that gets listened to. You knew that Dr. Martin Luther King was a PhD, right?
Yeah.
Do you know what in?
I don't know.
Philosophy.
Yeah. Nice.
Just
was he a pastor too?
Sorry?
Was he a pastor?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Reverend. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King.
That's what I thought I remembered that from.
I'm trying to think of the name of the church in Atlanta that was his. I can't remember, but I'm a great admirer of him, too. I use Letter from the Birmingham Jail in my political philosophy class. Or, I'm sorry, in my philosophy of law class.
Very cool.
And it is very cool. And we ask, as a result of that letter, do we have an absolute obligation to obey the law? And King says we sometimes have a moral obligation to disobey the law, as the law, it keeps black people out of.
The law is not right.
It can be wrong, no question about it. I think we got a lot of laws that are wrong.
Sure. And unfortunately, we're kind of running out of time, but I want to just.
I talk too much.
No, that's why I wanted you here. We got a few minutes left though, and I kind of want to leave it with sort of maybe a more fun question. When talking about presidents of the United States, I know we talked a little bit about this in your office, but if you had to choose one, which I know there's been quite a bit, 46, and I know everybody has their thoughts and opinions of them on who's good, and you could probably make a good top 5 of like why I like him, and him. But if you had to narrow it down to one, and why?
Well, I'll give you number 3.
Okay.
On my list of favorites, because the first 2 are a snap. Lincoln and Washington are tied for first.
If you don't have them on your list, it's like, did you look at history from
the third greatest, in my opinion, is James K. Polk.
Ooh.
The 11th president of the United States. But for Polk, we would not be a sea to shining sea. The Mexican War, which you could argue about the morality of.
Because that's when we kind of, as other countries were doing, we kind of dipped our toe in like sort of, maybe imperialism isn't the right word, but
It's not the right word because we promptly gave the same rights to the occupants of the territory we had taken in the Mexican cession.
Which is not something a imperialistic country does. You exploit that country.
Yeah. Now, we didn't give everybody the right to vote, but
Sure.
they got the same rights the rest of the country did. That said, if you look at the map of the United States, California, Nevada, Wyoming, parts of Colorado, parts of Kansas, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico were all taken from Mexico in the Mexican War.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big deal.
Sure. Expanding the country to...
That was over a third of Mexico's territory. Now, Mexico was an imperialist country as well, as much as we were.
Sure.
And the question was, Mexico wasn't going to be able to hold that territory. Somebody was going to get it. The British, even the Russians were as far south as San Francisco Bay at that point. Yeah, most people don't know that. You ever heard of Russian River, California?
Russian River, California.
Well, Russia claimed everything down to the Russian River, which is north of San Francisco, but the Russians were exploring San Francisco Bay.
Gotcha.
And so I suggest that Polk also settled the Oregon Territory question, which was Oregon and Washington. He really ran a dangerous bluff with Britain over the Oregon Territory and won. The British backed down for reasons that didn't have anything to do with us whipping them in a war. They didn't think it was worth it. They thought they'd gotten everything that was worth getting from Oregon and Washington.
Sure.
So that's my third favorite after Washington and Lincoln. And you can reverse Lincoln and Washington in order.
Yeah.
They're tied for first.
Sure. Oh man, I could go on and on about Lincoln and Washington, but I don't know. I guess I know one of my favorites, and maybe I'm biased being from Kansas, but Eisenhower
That's a good one.
He's got to be up there for me because you don't often hear which they're great accolades. The leader general in World War II. I love his letter and his speech before and coming up to D-Day. Just like I trained with these men, I devoted my time to this plan, and like a true leader he was, he's like, if this fails, blame me and me alone. And it's like, whew. But
take your hat off to that guy.
Yeah, but I think something that's not as talked about is how much of a master negotiator he was behind the scenes, with guys that were a little more brash, George Patton,
Montgomery.
Yeah, and he had to sort of just kind of keep things sort of balanced so we could keep this military machine running. And
that was a masterpiece of diplomacy, keeping the Allies together.
Yeah, because it was several different moving parts, with people who had a lot of different interests. And to keep it together was nothing short of amazing. And then his presidency, one of my favorite stories in American history, the Little Rock Nine with the 101st Airborne Division.
That's it. Yep.
I believe. Yeah, when the governor calls him, and they're talking about these students attending that school because Brown versus Board of Education had gone through, but there were still some outlier states.
They were a lot of outlier states.
Yeah, and that one being one of them, and Arkansas governor calls up. And they're talking about it, and I'm extremely abbreviating the conversation, but basically Eisenhower's like, "No, you work for me," and he sends the 101st Airborne, and they escort these students into the classroom, and it was just cool. Now, could you make the argument that he could have gone a little further with civil rights? Sure, but there's definitely some credit there to take those first couple steps. And yeah,
But I think it was Truman who desegregated the military, wasn't it?
Yeah, in World War II,
Well, I think Truman did it after. I don't know.
I'm pretty sure you're right in World War
II. But
II.
it was moving in that direction.
Yeah.
But I don't mean to diminish Eisenhower.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think World War II, it was still segregated.
Mostly, yeah.
And yeah, there hypocrisy's there. You could go into. But yeah, I think that was sort of a fun place to leave off on. I think that's about all I have. I think this was a good time, good productive time. If you have anything to add,
you asked me if the United States Constitution was hypocritical.
Oh yeah, we can cover that real quick.
2 minutes to talk about that.
Yeah, the only I personally am not in that camp, but
I'm not either.
You hear it quite a bit with just the glaring issue of slavery.
I think that fails to face reality, to say that it's hypocritical. The Declaration was a little hypocritical. All men are created equal, but the Constitution was rather forthright. Well, not particularly forthright, but the Constitution was clear that slavery existed and that the slaves the Three-Fifths Compromise, they'd be counted but not allowed to vote. This was necessary to get a country. It was a compromise. And
Constitution itself, right? The
whole Constitution is based on compromise.
Federalists and what was the other?
Well, the Anti-Federalists.
Yeah.
The if you read Federalists, I think it's about 4, 5, and 6, written by John Jay. You will see that the founding fathers, the framers of the Constitution, had a very real fear of European powers picking apart the colonies.
Yeah, because if you were split, like especially on,
right,
that was a real threat, right?
They thought so.
If you were to directly put your stance against slavery, the southern
weren't going to join
colonies, and then you have a split war, and then the colonies are split, and
they're vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I never hear this mentioned in the discussion, but let's say the North had called the South's bluff and said, fine, don't join the Union. Who would have freed the slaves then?
Yeah.
Lincoln had had no jurisdiction. We probably wouldn't have had a civil war.
Sure.
To justify the emancipation.
You almost wonder, right, if I guess the North, in this alternate history, if the North and Britain go to war, in this scenario, does the North, eventually, is this probably not even the United States that we recognize at all?
I think that's very possible.
And if I'm not wrong, there's the clause in there that the slave trade is outlawed.
1808, I believe.
So, at least in my mind, I think, at least subtly, they recognize that it's on its way out, the institution of slavery.
Well, Hamilton certainly did.
Mm-hmm. Until the Eli Whitney cotton gin.
The cotton gin.
Because I remember in high school thinking, well, if there's a machine that can do what slaves do, why do we need slaves anymore? Well, you need somebody to run the machine and
pick the cotton.
Yeah. But
it's an ugly fact of American history.
Yeah, and I think it's ignorant when people discount that. It's like, well, no, United States has been perfect. We're the saviors of the world. No, there's a lot of ugly stains in our story, but I also think it's a story of how we continue to try to hold up to the nearly impossible ideals of the Declaration and the Constitution.
I agree.
It's trying to get closer and closer, and it's no doubt hard, and there's definitely arguments to be made that we got a lot of work to still go. But I'd say, well, I think probably a more honest and more nuanced view is, in some ways we're on the right track, in some ways we're not so much on the right track. But yeah, unfortunately I think that's all the time we have for now. I would love to like continue. This is something that definitely passionate about talking with people, and this is why I love podcasting so much. Like we just did the debate a couple nights ago. And
I heard about that from Alex,
and it's debates are fine when you want to contest ideas, but I don't know if it, unfortunately, maybe didn't go that direction. But this is why I like podcasting, is because it's
civilized,
more of a chill, civilized environment where people can just say their ideas, and it's like.
Did the debate have a moderator?
Yes.
Who was it?
I don't remember her. I should know her name. I'm good with faces, not names.
I think we ought to have a frequent series of debates on campus.
We talked about it.
I think we should do
one in the fall that's strictly debate, and then one in the spring that's more of a kind of a forum where it's like students
can ask
more
questions. Than that. I think public debate is what we need, but civil discourse needs to be enforced by the moderator.
Yeah,
and you know, if the precedent needs to be set at the beginning, early in the debates, to say, we're through. If you guys can't speak to each other in a civilized tone, I'm not going to participate in.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I actually think we ought to have a series of presidential debates between experts in various questions. What do we do about Social Security? Let's have Joseph Biden appoint a committee to determine who the party's pro and con or the various positions are, and go over to Kennedy Center and have a debate. Anyway,
yeah,
you got to pull the plug on me.
Unfortunately,
no, it's fortunate for everybody involved, especially Dr. Gould, that you're going to pull the plug on me, but he gets sick of listening to me.
Yeah, well, it's been fun. I want to. Thanks for those who are listening, and this has been another episode of the Political Power Hour.